Welcome to the Rebellion Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Barton. 19 years ago, to this very day, a movie premiered at the Venice Film Festival at midnight. It featured a blend of anti-consumerist nihilism and gleeful violence and aggression. Its bloody fight scenes were punctuated by the sounds of fists colliding with beefsteak. It was so offensive, some people walked out before the film had even finished. And the ending featured a twist. The kind of twist that existed before M. Night Shyamalan ruined movies forever with his twist endings. It became a cult classic, inspiring groups of angry, aggressive young men to take up bare-knuckle fighting in secretive, invite-only organizations. And even to this day, 19 years later, these underground fighting groups still exist. That's part of the legacy of the film known as Fight Club. Today, I'm happy because I get to sit down with Professor Scott Wilson from Luther College at the University of Regina. He teaches English, and he's done a lot of thinking about Chuck Palahniuk's most famous work. Scott wrote his master's thesis about the themes in Fight Club and was nominated for the Governor General's Academic Gold Medal for his work. Scott, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Matt. And it's Palahniuk. Palahniuk. I don't think we want to make him or his fans angry.
I think I've pronounced it probably about 5 different ways in the last.
Yeah, it happens all the time. Palahniuk is the most common mispronunciation, but you can be forgiven for that. Palahniuk.
Before we get too deep into Fight Club, today we're going to talk about we're going to drink and taste Double. It's a double IPA collaboration brew between 21st Street Brewing in Saskatoon and Pile of Bones Brewing in Regina. Have you had it before?
I haven't.
Okay, well, let's give it a first sip here. Cheers.
Cheers. I think for a double IPA, it's a little bit more fruity than I was expecting, which is not a bad thing at all.
You expected it to be more bitter?
A little bit more bitter, a little bit more kind of like piney. But yeah, it's nice.
I feel it's kind of boozy.
Yeah, it should be. I mean, maybe that's why it's quadruple double and not simply double. But it's a great way to start a Monday, I guess.
It has a thinner body than I would have expected.
Mm-hmm.
I figured it would be just a fuller body in the mouthfeel.
Yeah, it's sort of brighter. It's not quite sour, but it's definitely, sometimes they can be a little bit, I don't know, more malty or something.
It's got a little bit of a dank character to it, but I don't know if I like or dislike it. It just is part of the character of the beer.
It's true.
Dankness.
I don't mind some dank. Beers that are funky sometimes can be good. Start to develop this vocabulary around different types of beers that you drink.
Well, you hang out with Vanessa and myself and Mark and Dave long enough.
It's true. It's kind of weird seeing on a Monday, not a Thursday, for an exclusive day.
And you're always coming in to drink the weird beers as opposed to just the standard regular lineup.
I really enjoy the weirdest beers. The ones where the serving staff will say, "Have you had that before? Have you tried it?" And I'll have to explain to them, "I have, and please bring it anyways."
Well, here's where the name comes from. They said it comes from the fact it's 2 breweries using 2 malts and 2 hops. And they said they used Chinook and Cashmere. Chinook's a pretty popular hop right now. I've also seen some single malt Cashmere hopped beers. But I would say Chinook is far more popular.
And why is Chinook popular these days? What kind of flavor do you get from that?
So when you're looking at Chinook, you're looking for a pine-like spicy bouquet with robust grapefruit.
I'm definitely getting grapefruit.
I would say almost to the point where I don't want that much grapefruit. Grapefruit is not a flavor I enjoy as much as, say, orange or other citrus tropical like pineapple.
Right, absolutely.
It's a little bitter. And then they said that, well, here's the rest of their notes. Intensely hoppy with ripe fruit, pineapple, and citrus. A clean and dusty dry finish. It said it's not for a beginner or the faint of heart.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I think you can, sometimes when you drink beers or go wine tasting and the description has like nothing to do with what you're drinking, or you can't, you don't recognize that at all. It can be a little bit of an indication that somebody's maybe using a little bit of hyperbole and trying to prop themselves up a bit. But I think this description really works for this beer. And I can see that's not for everybody, but I think as in terms of double IPAs go, this would be like an accessible one to try.
If it was your first double IPA, I'd say there you go. Definitely stands in contrast to Rebellion's double IPA.
Definitely.
If you put them side by side, you're going to be tasting a very different.
Yeah, and I think the Rebellion double is more of that pine. That pine is like really forward there. It's like a hop bomb. It's a little bit more intense than this is. Like I said, this is like brighter. It feels a little bit fresher, and I think that's not, in my experience, been exactly what a double IPA is. And again, that's not to say that that's a bad thing at all. It's I'm enjoying this quite a bit, actually.
I have not found a double IPA that's for me yet. I'm not opposed to the concept of double IPAs, but I think in general, if I had a different choice, I would pick something else.
But you're going to keep searching for that double IPA for you.
I'm always willing to keep trying. I have faith in the idea that somebody could make one that might appeal to me.
Well, I'm hoping you'll find that one day.
So let's talk Fight Club.
Yeah, let's do that.
What were you thinking the first time you saw the movie, read the book?
Oh, first time that I mean, I'll tell you about, I took an undergraduate English course in my fourth year. I was over at the University of Alberta, and we were studying the book, and everybody was assigned to read it. We had to come back to class on a certain day, and the professor just walked back in and asked everybody, like, what do you think? General thoughts. How did this book impact you? What are you feeling? And these two guys at the back of the room were just kind of like nodding and excited to talk. And when they did, one of them basically said, I think it's a really great idea. And I looked around and there was other people nodding the same kind of thing. And then I put up my hand and said, has anyone in here been punched in the face before or punched someone in the face before? And there was like a lot of people shaking their heads no. And I said, because both things really hurt. And I don't think that's what the author is trying to tell you. It's called Fight Club, but I think it's really about not starting a fight club. And I think ever since then I've been fascinated by it in that way, because I was getting something different out of it. But then watching the movie and then thinking like, maybe it's not such a bad idea. I think David Fincher did a really good job of turning this into something that's really like aesthetically pleasing, and I mean the soundtrack's amazing, and I think it's a beautiful piece of cinema. But at the end of the day, it's one of those things where I think a lot of people end up siding with the wrong characters, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later.
Well, how did you come to write your thesis on Fight Club? It must have resonated with you in some way.
Yeah, it certainly did. I've always been interested in masculinity studies.
What does that mean?
Masculinity studies is sort of like an area, a branch of gender studies where you talk about like sort of social constructions of masculinity and maleness, how society privileges maleness, how people perform their gender. And for me, it was always interesting because it was one of those moments where I've never been a violent person, and I think a lot of times our society allows room for men to be violent and even like privileges that. And so for me, it was always about,
When you say privileges, you mean it's kind of a dumb thing?
well, it encourages it. Ever since you're like a little kid, there's some encouragement for boys and then men to solve their problems aggressively, physically or otherwise, and to be strong and reserve their emotions and those kinds of things, or show certain emotions more than others. Like male expressions of anger are not, seen as taboo in the same way that like female expressions of angers are or frustration are. You can just think about Serena Williams and people talking about the U.S. Open. I think she's right in the fact that there's a double standard there, because we've all seen male tennis players say terrible things and throw rackets, and I think John McEnroe's still on TV and he's revered as one of the greatest, and he made a career off of acting the way that Serena Williams does, and to bring that back to Fight Club, it's just that the men in that book and the men in that movie are really frustrated, and that's not to downplay that their feeling of frustration is legitimate, and that's actually what they're feeling. But Marla Singer, the lone sort of primary female character in the book, she has way bigger problems than the narrator ever could. And she's not creating like a domestic terror cell and blowing up buildings. So Tyler Durden is revered for like his ideologies, and Marla Singer is similar in a lot of ways. She's got a lot of destructive ideas. She's certainly as self-destructive, and she's not revered and not looking for that in the same kind of way. So.
So how does that lead into your thesis?
The thesis basically just came out of, and I tell my students this all the time, like, when you write a paper in your undergraduate degree, you try not to just think of this as like a throwaway. Like, my prof told me to do this, I need the marks, and I'm going to move on to the next one. But to find something that you're writing about that is important to you. And basically I just couldn't get Fight Club and this idea out of my head. It was just one of those things, trying to figure out, I guess, like something about myself, something about why that movie was so popular. Even to this day, I teach a lot of things that are, they come sort of like cultural phenomenons, and I try to figure out like what is it about our society that makes this so important at this moment in time. For example, I teach the first Dexter book and a little bit of the TV show, and I always show some images of some of the ad campaigns that say like he's America's favorite serial killer, which is a weird thing to have a favorite of. And the same thing with Fight Club. How can this thing become such a cultural phenomenon where my thesis supervisor, she was saying like, I didn't really realize until I read that book how many of my students' email addresses were like references to that film, like Project Mayhem, 88, In Tyler We Trust, all these kind of things that were showing up in these emails, to the level where Staples, the office supply store, had the address of Paper Street where they're making all the soap on like the sample for the envelopes and stuff. Like it just seeped everywhere, and I was trying to figure out like, why is that the case, particularly for something that I thought that people misunderstood a lot.
So what were the big ideas from your thesis that you explored? I mean, it's such a vast...
Like, number one, there's irony that's being missed here, and part of that is due to this real life masculinity crisis, and that women are often to blame in that book and the movie. Like, the narrator's father is like absent, and he's off starting other families, and he's never around, and his mom is, and yet she's the one that takes the blame. And Marla Singer is like, he loves her, but he won't admit that because she's very problematic, and she's the source of all of his problems as well, and that sort of thing. So men blaming women for their problems, and then how all of that, people seeing that in the book or that resonating in the book, and then starting real life fight clubs. And people can look this up online. There's an E26 documentary on real life fight clubs, and you can see it on YouTube, and it's in San Jose, Silicon Valley. It's like Glint Clemanis, I think the guy's name is. And these guys get together weekly, go in the garage, and beat each other with Hello Kitty toilet seats and O magazine, and they suffer serious injury, and they've added weapons, and they've essentially broken every rule of Fight Club for their Fight Club.
The first rule of Fight Club is you do not talk about Fight Club. The second rule of Fight Club is you do not talk about Fight Club. Third rule of Fight Club, someone yells stop, goes limp, taps out. The fight is over. Fourth rule, only 2 guys to a fight. Fifth rule, 1 fight at a time, fellas. Sixth rule, no shirts, no shoes. Seventh rule, fights will go on as long as they have to. And the 8th and final rule, if this is your first night at Fight Club, you have to fight.
On the one hand, it's hard to watch, and on the other hand, it's just fascinating to think, like, why would they ever do that? And you just see, like, the wife in the background, like, throwing out the trash and shaking her head and, like, walking back inside like that. I think it's like a insurance commercial or something, or some banking. And
they don't get shut down by the cops because they're consenting adults.
Consenting adults on private property.
Not for profit.
Yeah. Yeah, if they wanted to make money off of it and set up an octagon, they would shut it down immediately.
So the movie itself, or the book, these ideas, do you think they've aged well?
I think they have aged well. I think the movie, I mean, they're rebooting everything these days. You don't really need to reboot Fight Club, because the only thing you really need to probably add in there is there's no sort of ranting about social media and how many LinkedIn requests the narrator gets every day. I mean, he's still using the inter-office messaging system and sending these haikus he's writing because he's reached a sense of enlightenment. But I mean, the frustrations, like I was saying, like this masculinity in crisis, I think Chuck Palahniuk was presenting an ironic solution to a real problem. Go ahead and do this and you'll feel better. But then people thought, you know what, that sounds like a legitimate solution to my real life problem.
Self-destruction.
Self-destruction and
nihilism.
Absolutely. And in a lot of cases, I think there's some value there. I mean, I think in the movie and in the book, when the narrator can't sleep, his doctor sort of downplays his illness, right? He's like, if you want to see real suffering, go check out Remaining Men Together, this testicular cancer support group. And he doesn't mean actually go there. He just says, like, you know, get some exercise. I think he says, eat some valerian root. But he's just being a bad doctor. And the narrator takes it he says, well, I'm going to go check it out. And then he finds that observing other people's suffering and having people actually validate his suffering, even though he's lying about being sick, is the thing that he's missing in his life. Like he literally gets hugged and cries and then sleeps. And that's the thing that's missing in like his office life. It's the thing that's missing in his family life. And I think the big thing about it is like in North American society, we sort of have this like never good enough sort of model happening where if that's all it was like go to the support group, get some validation about your feelings and your frustrations and your pain, that would be okay. But both the book and the movie have this escalation afterwards where people just end up saying like, well, it's not good enough. I need the next fix. I need to move from an IPA to a double IPA.
Well, he says Marla ruins his whole experience. She exposes his lie, and then it forces him to confront the phoniness of himself.
Yeah, she calls him a tourist.
Marley, you liar! You big tourist! I need this! Now get out!
And he takes great offense to that. And again, that goes to what I was talking about earlier. There's this blaming Marla for the problem, but it's like he's lying. He's taking advantage of the kindness of strangers who actually are dealing with terminal illness.
I like when she calls him out and she says, I saw you rehearsing this speech.
I saw you practicing this.
Practicing what?
Telling me off. Is it going as well as you hoped?
Yeah. And I think that's the beauty of Marla in that book, and I think that's the sort of check that he needs. She challenges him on his bullshit. She shows him what like real suffering is. I mean, at one point she thinks that she has breast cancer. She lives this very self-destructive life. She doesn't have the good paying office job and the nice condo. And I mean, particularly in the book, her mother has this like ridiculous ideal for beauty that she needs to adhere to. And I think they're similar in a lot of ways, but I think she's able to, and I think like a lot of great relationships do this. I think the person you're with should make you better and make you confront yourself and make you want to live up to not only their standard, but like your potential. And I think that's what the narrator wants to be, like a rock star. He wants to be famous. He wants to be rich. All these things that he thinks that the American dream has promised him.
We've all been raised on television to believe that one day we'd all be millionaires and movie gods and rock stars, but we won't. We're slowly learning that fact.
And she's never saying like you can't have that. In fact, I think she accepts him for all of his flaws. But I think she's seen as a bad guy, and I think in a lot of like contemporary television and books and things, like that's the same thing. Everyone hates, at least on the internet and message boards and social media, like Skylar White, Walter White's wife on Breaking Bad. She's the worst, and I hate her. And for the most part, she's basically like telling him like, don't be a criminal. You know, Carmela Soprano on The Sopranos was the same kind of thing. And I think Marla's the solution to his problems in a lot of ways. It's just like, you know, tell her how you feel. This is like elementary school. Do you like me? Send a note. Like weird, like not wanting to admit it. And
They're both very broken, screwed up people, though.
absolutely.
I think it's generous to say she's the solution. I think they're both kind of circling the drain.
They're both circling the drain, but in every Chuck Palahniuk book, it's and he would say that all of his books are romance novels. He said this all the time, and he'll double down on it. And I don't necessarily think he's wrong, because it is about screwed up people in a screwed up society trying to find some sense of community. And while they're not ideal humans by any stretch, they're certainly good together. And he, I think, is intimidated by her. And I think, and he's clearly mentally ill. He has these like manic episodes. Has this like alternate personality. But I think in a lot of ways, Tyler Durden, this person that he creates, is who he wants to be. It's this like ideal of masculinity that he thinks like that's who I need to be to win over Marla, because she's so great. But he spends his whole time being in like serious denial about this. And I think it's maybe different in the book and in the movie. I think she's a much more developed character in the book, and I think there's a little bit more about his thoughts about her. But I think everybody can relate to that idea that like our society in a lot of ways wants the perfect life that the narrator wants. You know, you gotta get the perfect house, the perfect car, the perfect family, and all that kind of stuff. And both of them are just basically saying that they want to be accepted with their flaws. And she's willing to show him like the cigarette burns on her arm and talk about her past traumas,
My God. I haven't been like that since grade school.
and he's very much like, I can't talk about any of this. And then the Tyler Durden character sort of fills in for him, and they have that relationship. But I think she's smart enough to know that he's who he really is. And at the ending of the book, for example, it's very different than the ending in the movie, and we can talk about the ending later. But it's very much about her and the people from the support groups, that kind of original solution, coming to help him. Which I think is Chuck Palahniuk saying that all along. That's, you know, what you needed was this community, and what you needed was this relationship, and not to become legendary, and not to blow up the world and start again.
There's this thing that has stuck with me through the years, this idea I keep chewing on, and I haven't fully articulated it until maybe now with you, but I put it back into the 1999 context. What's happening in 1999? Where are we as a society? Where was me as a person and how I consume this? I'm thinking Adbusters is really popular. Anti-consumerism is a kind of this naive wave. We're seeing Naomi Klein's No Logo,
Sure.
which even she herself says was written ahead of its time. If she had just waited a few more years to mature and grow up and write the book then, it would have done better. And then we have books like Andrew Potter's The Rebel Cell, which is saying that resisting capitalism, resisting consumerism is self-defeating. And
Right.
the front of his book is Che Guevara on a coffee cup. And
Right.
it's like, damn.
Yeah. I mean,
And I draw into this, so I draw into this speech that Tyler says, or it's Chuck's writing, where he says, we're the middle children of history.
Advertising has us chasing cars and clothes, working jobs we hate so we can buy shit we don't need. We're the middle children of history, man. No purpose or place. We have no Great War, no Great Depression. Our Great War is a spiritual war. Our Great Depression is our lives.
To me, that's his, like, I'm defining the problem, and now I'm going to tell you what I think the solution is, as
Right.
Tyler Durden. And I think in that context, we haven't seen Iraq yet. We haven't seen 9/11. We're far enough removed from the first Iraq war, where it was kind of just televised and it happened in like 2 weeks and it was just ended. Like it's like America at its peak.
yeah.
So he's saying this materialism feels so hollow. You know, he comes to this thing where he says material wealth is a measure of your self-worth, and he's spitting on that. So I think about that a lot. I'm like, you're not the things you own.
You're not your job. You're not how much money you have in the bank. You're not the car you drive. You're not the contents of your wallet. You're not your fucking khakis.
He says that a lot. He riffs on those themes in 1999. It felt very fresh to me, but now it kind of feels naive.
Yeah, no, and that's a very good point, and I think what's happening is Chuck Palahniuk wrote a sequel to Fight Club 2, that was produced as a graphic novel by Dark Horse with Cameron Stewart and some others. And what's interesting about it is Chuck Palahniuk, the author, shows up as a character in the graphic novel, and he's talking about the very things that you're talking about how naive he was when he published this. And it'll cut to like him with his writers group and them saying like, oh, this again? Like, are we really going back to that same well over and over again? And there are characters in the novel, the graphic novel, that are talking about these Chuck Palahniuk truisms, or these Tyler Durden truisms. And he's had a really tough time dealing with the fact that a lot of people worship Tyler Durden and his ideologies. And they project that onto Chuck Palahniuk, who I think, from what I know of him and his interviews and documentaries about him, is nothing like Tyler Durden. And he had to struggle with the idea, much like you were talking about with No Logo and those kinds of books, is that there's always this contradiction. Like, No Logo was very popular. It's an anti-consumerist text. And then suddenly Naomi Klein's speaking fees go up and she's making more money. Chuck Palahniuk wrote an anti-consumerist novel and then became very famous. And he's still, if you check the Amazon bestsellers list at any point, in any year, there's a good chance that Fight Club is like in the top 50. Because it's, and it might be timeless because it has something really profound to say, and it might be timeless because it has nothing to say at all. And I think that's the beauty of it, and I think that's what I struggle with when I'm writing about it and thinking about it, and I'm sure it's the same thing you do every time you watch the movie. You're kind of like, for a brief moment, you know, Brad Pitt, he's charismatic enough where you're like, you know what? I like what this guy's saying. And then you step back a bit and say, okay, well, that's obvious. Like, obviously we're all going to die one day. And what Tyler Durden offers people, particularly in the book, and this is the same in the movie, is a chance for them to be themselves. And this is the biggest cliche in the history of cliches. But that's what everybody says. Like, you know what? You go in a job interview, you know what you should do? Be yourself. Which, in a lot of cases, is a terrible idea.
Because yourself is probably shit.
Well, or yourself is not exactly what the company's looking for. I mean, you know, in a lot of cases, someone's like, why do you want to work for this company? And the answer is like, well, I need to pay my mortgage, so I need a paycheck, and those health benefits are great.
He does say in the movie,
How's that working out for you? What? Being clever?
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that piece. I've say that to people when they're being smartasses to me.
Yeah.
But I'm still trying to say, give them the middle finger, but with some tact.
Absolutely. And it's all these contradictions. When Chuck Palahniuk is writing about this, and then he has this really successful book, like, how can you be the guy that is like anti-consumerism when you're one of the few like real celebrity authors of the last 20 or 30 years? I mean, how do you, I mean, he seems to live a life that where he sort of hides away from the attention and the sort of ideas about money and wealth and fame. He recently, a story came out that one of his agents or an accountant or something like stole a bunch of his money. Like, he hasn't been getting money for the last few projects. And so for Chuck Palahniuk, I think there are all these contradictions about him, but also his writing, where that's the danger of writing an ironic text, right? You hope that people pick up on these ironic markers throughout the book and throughout the movie that say, maybe you shouldn't trust Tyler Durden. And back to the point earlier about the individuality thing, the narrator's worried that he's losing himself, whatever that might be. And I always tell my students, like, you need to define that. Like, what do you think his problem is? Because what my self is and what somebody else's self is totally different. And it's basically meaningless to say that unless you define it. But they're basically saying, like, if you want individuality, then follow me, Tyler Durden, a leader who demands that you have the same haircut as the guy next to you, wear the same outfit, listen to all the same rules. And then by the time Fight Club evolves into Project Mayhem, which is this like terror organization set on destroying credit card companies and bringing about equality, then the rules go from, you know, you don't talk about Fight Club to you don't ask questions. And in terms of the office job that's sapping the narrator's soul, where he can't do that either, it seems to me that leading the life where you don't get to ask any questions, you don't really get to be yourself, but you have a comfortable life, versus the one where you are part of an organization that starts to commit terrorist acts, and in the book starts to like murder like government officials. Maybe your previous life wasn't so bad. And so in a lot of cases what we do, and I think in a lot of cases what happens in a lot of literature, is that particularly transgressive fiction, which is the kind of genre that Chuck Palahniuk writes in, a lot of times characters know they have a problem. They're just not happy. They need to find a solution. But they've grown up in a society that has taught them how to act and how to get ahead and how to be successful.
It feels like you're looking at Office Space, where you're
Yeah.
hiding a fish in a desk and destroying documents and slacking off.
I generally come in at least 15 minutes late. I use the side door, that way Lumberg can't see me. And after that, I just sort of space out for about an hour. Till I'm thirsty.
Space out?
Yeah, I just stare at my desk. But it looks like I'm working. I do that for probably another hour after lunch, too. I'd say in a given week, I probably only do about 15 minutes of real, actual work.
Yeah, and it's kind of like,
'Cause he doesn't wanna fill
where
out
does it get you?
TPS
So yeah, exactly, absolutely. Like your rebellion then is either just meaningless. Like the company really doesn't care that you're stealing a stapler, but they might make a big deal about it or make you feel like it's a big deal. But Chuck Palahniuk's characters basically switch one lifestyle for the same lifestyle and then think that they've found salvation when they're clearly worse off. And people write about Fight Club all the time, or they talk about it and they say, Fight Club makes their lives better. And I don't think there's any evidence for that. I've been looking for it. I think perhaps temporarily, the sort of camaraderie that they get, the community that they get. Chuck Palahniuk has exhaustively talked about how males in our society often don't have communities where they can just openly express themselves and support each other and provide other men compliments. But that we do this, but we have to do it in like, the arenas of sports, or we need to do that. You'll see people out at the bar late on a Friday and they got their arms around each other, and it's like, the classic Simpsons, like this guy, he's the guy sort of thing. And then, in professional sports, men are hugging all the time. They're like slapping each other on the ass. And these are things that in day-to-day life are not condoned. Or in North American culture, seeing men holding hands is not a thing that you really see, but this happens in plenty of other cultures. This kind of goes back to...
They can have their prayer circle before the game kicks off.
Absolutely. And for me, for like masculinity studies, it's usually about masculinities. Like every culture has got a different brand of... Brand's probably the appropriate word when we're talking about Fight Club, but they've got their own brand of what masculinity is. And when we see these other versions of it, even between an urban or rural setting, or between countries, or between even just different communities within the same province, you can see how men act a different way depending on how they were raised. And to say that one of these ways is right or wrong is foolish. But in Fight Club, there's like one right way to do this. There's
Shave your head, become a space monkey.
solve your problems by punching each other and blowing things up. Absolutely.
Well, he has all the hallmarks of a cult: changing your physical appearance, subjecting yourself to 3 days of starvation and exhaustion before you actually enter in, so then you're mentally and physically exhausted to then receive the wisdom.
Right.
Then you're now, like you said, no longer allowed to ask questions, so you don't question dear leader.
Right.
And he's shouting at them with a bullhorn.
Enough, maggots. You are not special. You are not a beautiful or unique snowflake. You are the same decaying organic matter as everything else. We are the all-singing, all-dancing crap of the world. We are all part of the same compost heap.
Just like other cults have done, and he subjects them to regular physical abuse to knock down the ones who may be challenging him in the pecking order.
Absolutely.
He kicks the crap out of Jared Leto because he's jealous of him. He's,
Yeah, he's angel face. He's too pretty. So like that's not what a man looks like. So he needs to like even the playing field, right? He needs to make him look worse. And that's the whole thing. Is like the book is about men need to have scars. They need to not be beautiful. And there's that great scene in the Fincher movie where they're on the bus. It's Ed Norton and Brad Pitt, and Tyler Durden, who's the Brad Pitt, played by Brad Pitt, points to a Calvin Klein ad and says, "Is that really what a man's supposed to look like?" And like objectively, the model in the photo is less attractive than Brad Pitt. And it's another layer of this irony of having this contradiction of people wanting to follow Tyler Durden because he's supposed to be this everyman, but then having him in the books having like long flowing gold locks and like he's like Chris Hemsworth or something. But then talking about how the society is very superficial, that he's got, that people go to the gym to work out so that they look good, but they're not really that strong. Like the line in the book is, even a souffle looks pumped these days. And so there is that. You're right. It's completely a cult. By every definition of that, if you go through a checklist. What Tyler Durden, though, I think for all the negatives of Tyler Durden, there's what he's actually asking people to do, or at least the way he's living his life, is in a way that I think is admirable in some ways. And I'm not, if you're listening to this, please don't go and start a cult.
Or blow up a bank.
Yeah, no bank blowing up, please. But when it comes right down to it, Tyler Durden just makes decisions for himself. And I don't think that he's actually like anti-society in every way, because I think that he's created a model where he's mimicking the society. He's taking sort of the best and worst parts of the American culture that he lives in and then using it for profit. But in the novel in particular, Tyler Durden, when the narrator meets him, is an artist. Like he's just on the beach, he's naked, he's making sculptures out of driftwood. He spends his time, his free time making like artisanal soaps, like handmade, handcrafted beauty products. And so
calls it the yardstick of civilization?
Yeah, absolutely. He's doing that by being like anti sort of superficial, like he's selling the liposuctioned fat back to people. And so in a lot of ways, he's not what I think, particularly in like 1996, 1999, like your stereotypical, like ideal American man is, right? He's this artist free spirit artist who's making soap.
Get a job, you hippie.
Absolutely. And he is that, like, sort of, he's anti-corporate. He's like working in this theater because he likes film. Well, at least likes splicing certain body parts into films. But he's this rebellious artist, which is usually what artists do. They think about what's happening in society, and they create art that challenges that. That's always why people are talking about like Hollywood is this like left-leaning group of people that's set on destroying American society. I mean, that was true in 96, 99. That's true now. And so in a lot of ways, Tyler Durden is saying, like, at his best, and there's a lot more bad than I think good, but there is that idea that behind that, I think what the narrator admires about him is Tyler Durden has the freedom to make choices for himself. But since he's this manifestation of a mental illness or something, it takes on this like monstrous turn. And I think in a lot of cases, every Chuck Palahniuk book is about kind of figuring out a healthy middle ground. not having any ideology that goes too far left, too far right. And I don't even mean that like politically. Just you in either case, like at the extremes is when bad things happen. It's like when you bring up cult, it's sort of like there's a certain point where a cult, a church, or a support group, or whatever it is, political movement, et cetera, crosses that line, and then suddenly we're talking about like it's a charismatic church.
One of the other ideas I wanted to chew at, and it's very first world problem. His problems, he's whining because he has all the things, he's eating well, he's living well, but we are in a society in 1999, NAFTA is still fairly fresh. We see all these changes now that we didn't necessarily see 25 years ago that were predicted. The moving of the jobs from middle America, the pursuit of low cost without any care for the value of a good or where it's manufactured. And now I think we're swinging back and we're saying what I buy matters, but how it was made also defines me and matters too. Whether it's craft beer, or if a tree is planted when I buy a t-shirt, or if my tennis shoes or my sports shoes follow a political movement because a guy decided to kneel down on a field. People are defining themselves still through materialism. It's still reverberating in that.
Absolutely. I think we're doing a good job of talking about
conscious consumerism?
Yeah, conscious consumerism. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of people that are conscious consumers and they mean it. I mean, there's a lot of great things happening in Regina along those lines. The farmers market is great for that, buying locally through Local and Fresh, supporting local breweries, even being able to get products that are made, supporting local restaurants and that sort of stuff. You mentioned first world problems. There is a cost at the moment to being a conscious consumer. So in a lot of cases, you can find things that are on par with like supermarket prices. And there are times where you need to, understand that you might be paying more to make an ethical choice. You mentioned like the Colin Kaepernick campaign. It's sort of like Nike's being applauded for doing that, but we're still talking about a company that kind of like sets up factories in other countries and pays people far less than perhaps they're going to be paid.
Child labor, slave wages.
Absolutely. It's the sort of dilemma that everybody has about thinking about the factory conditions in like an iPhone factory and then still buying the next one. And so I think between 99 and now, there's a lot of parallels. I think that certainly there's a growth of that. But I mean, you're talking about NAFTA and everyone's sitting around listening to the radio and watching TV thinking like, is that even going to exist? Or if it does exist, is it going to have a new name, new branded name, and it's going to be pretty much the same? Or is a lot of that going to go by the wayside? And I think these are all part of what drive the narrator in Fight Club to have this existential crisis. Where do you find happiness when the higher quality, genuine, handmade product does cost more, but your job still pays you the same? How do you know even that the products that you're buying, even if you do some research, aren't made in a sweatshop?
Burn it all down and vote for Trump?
Please, no.
that cultural malaise that Polinick's mining, that anger, that rage, that disenfranchisement.
Absolutely.
I have my nose pressed up against the glass of society and I'm not fully participating, whether as a consumer or a voter. It's being expressed through MAGA and these Proud Boys and Jordan Peterson and InfoWars. There's that fear. There's so like buy some vitamins, it'll make you smarter. Hey, prepare for doomsday with some
Alex Jones, right?
Yeah, they're a nut, but people are feeding this, like they're buying into it.
Yeah, and probably 99, and maybe I'm misremembering this, but this is probably like the age of like Glenn Beck and those kind of guys. And we always have those figures in our lives. I think the Trump thing makes a lot of sense, and I'm sure there's a paper yet to be written on the similarities between Tyler Durden and his following and Donald Trump and his following. Because we talked about like Chuck Palahniuk, Tyler Durden truisms, just like these statements that don't mean very much, but they resonate with people. That's Donald Trump's bread and butter. Like that's all he needs to do is say something confidently with a microphone in front of him, and suddenly it's a fact. This is probably where Tyler Durden differs, actually, is that he doesn't promise them the world. In fact, all he does is tell them that they're trash, that they're insignificant, that they're like toxic human waste.
There's a Hobbesian idea that I've kind of glommed onto. He says that people seek the esteem of others. This is one of their primary motivations. Their value, their worth is what others think of them. So when we have this material security, but not the esteem or the power to do anything about it, it's hollow to us. That's that frustration. I wanted to like poke at that, but I feel like we're kind of running out of time.
Absolutely. I think the quick answer to that about how hollow and shallow it is. Again, back to Chuck Palahniuk and some of his ideas. He constantly talks about, and I think his work reflects this in a lot of his books. He has an idea that the way to become successful in American society is to become wealthy, beautiful, powerful. But to do that, you have to sacrifice that sort of esteem of other people. And even when someone's famous and powerful, what they're lacking is somebody actually seeing them for who they see themselves as, like their genuine self. But he kind of talks about this about being like a penthouse suite or something, or a castle with a moat around it, where the more beautiful you become, the more powerful you become, the more rich you become, the less you can actually trust that people like you and not your money, your beauty, etc. And so in a lot of his books, beautiful characters end up disfiguring themselves some way to be seen as normal. This is sort of that thing when supermodels say it's like really tough to find a date, and then nobody really has that much empathy for them. Or the person who's got billions of dollars. Again, it's hard to feel sympathy for that figure, but they probably are surrounded by a lot of yes men, yes women who are just going to tell them what they want to hear. And so I think that you're right about the needing esteem. It just seems that in a lot of cases, esteem doesn't come from what the American dream in a lot of these books is demanding of the characters.
So if we want to put a nice little neat little bow, I mean, there's always more to talk about when it comes to Fight Club. Chuck Palahniuk's key takeaway, it's a romance novel. Or in your view, what do you think people should take away now?
Just because that's the title of the book doesn't mean that's the thing he's calling for. I still go back to that. Fight Club is a book about, and quite frankly, the Fight Club part of Fight Club is only like 20 pages. Like the rest of it is not in a Fight Club. And so at the end of the day, he's basically trying to use satire to criticize our society. He's using this kind of over-the-top solution that I think for him was ridiculous. And so at the end of the day, I'm sorry if you tuned into this listening for me to like praise Fight Club the whole time. I still think it's a very valuable text. Like I said, studying it and why it's relevant and why it's so popular is worthwhile. But yeah, he's not telling you to start a Fight Club.
Don't start Fight Club.
Yeah, no fighting. Drink craft beer instead. start your own club, go into Rebellion, hitting some other Regina breweries, and nobody gets punched. Hopefully.
Unless they really deserve it. Maybe. Scott, I want to thank you for your time today.
My pleasure.
Rebels, thanks for tuning in this week. If you want to find the latest news about Rebellion Brewing, be sure to check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Untapped. Thank you for joining the Rebellion.